Okay, so let's get started with the class tonight. I posted some class notes to the event that I created on Facebook, as well as I am reposting them now into our chat. Good evening. All right. If you open the chat box, you should see the file for the Melee Tactics class notes posted there. If anyone has any questions, especially if you're on push to talk or if you want to type them into the Zoom chat, I'll keep an eye on that as well. And I can address questions as we go. And then there will be time for questions at the end. So let's just get started. We're going to start off with some very basic concepts because I don't know the skill level necessarily of everyone in this class, though I do have a great inkling of the skill level of several of the people in this class, and that is advanced. To start off, when we're practicing in our local area, when we're getting ready for a melee on the battlefield at Gulf War, so often we get into these ideas that we're going to go out there and our job is to just kill the other guys. And part of my goal in this class and in future classes is to change that mindset from just kill the other guys to it's my responsibility to protect my team, my allies, so we can complete our objectives together. So at least for the purposes of our discussions in this class, while we are going to talk about various tactics about how we're going to eliminate enemy units, the first and foremost rule that we're going to be playing by is survive and protect your buddy. So that's going to influence a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight. And you know, one of the questions I ask in this outline is, do you have your battle buddy? So when we're in our local groups and we're practicing with people that we think we're going to go to Gulf War with, go to Penzik with, I think it's really important that we develop this concept of I have my battle buddy. And maybe there should be two of them because maybe your battle buddy can't always go to war. And we still need to be good at practicing and fighting with other people. So occasionally we do need to mix it up. But we really want to get to know 2 to 3 people really, really well in how we interact with those people, how we function as a unit together. Because the better you know those people, the better you know their habits, what they want to do in a melee, the better off we're going to be. So let's dive into it. When we go into a melee, the first thing we want to think of is of ourselves as a group. I am not Twill going out there to get the highest kill score and win the battle. I am part of the Bringwalad unit, and the Bringwalad unit is going to be the most effective unit on that battlefield. I'm going to protect my fellow members of that Bringwalad unit. I'm going to keep myself alive, and most importantly, I'm going to keep the people to my right and left alive. And then after that point, I'm going to be following whatever the commands are coming from my commander and the general. So if my commander says, hey, you and you break off, go flank that line, that's my new job. I'm going to do the best I can in the process of completing that objective to keep myself and my allies alive. And I have to recognize when those moments are when keeping myself alive or getting the kill myself is not as important as completing the objective for our team. And so we're going to be talking a lot about when is it okay to make that sacrifice? What are the opportunities we need to be looking for and taking on our own? And how do we keep ourselves and our allies alive while we're doing those things? Generally speaking, when we're talking about all of this, when we're talking about trading, I'm going to be talking about high value targets, and those can mean multiple different things. So a high value target could be you see Joe Hotstick on the other side of the field from you, and he's got his mod collar on, and he is decked out in his regalia, and you know he's a problem. He's going to take out your line. He's not paying attention to you. You might get taken out for it, but you know you can kill him. That's probably a great trade right there. Because unless you're also Joe Hotstick, it's okay to trade you for that mod if you have to. And that way, you as a unit, your group can exploit that area of the battlefield a little better and any advantage they may gain. It's okay to trade if you know that you're going to take out enough targets or key targets on the battlefield that will allow your unit to overcome an enemy unit. And it's okay to make trades when it is working as a unit to achieve your objective. Your commander calls press, you all press forward together, everyone does it at the same time. If someone has to be Bob in that process and someone, you know, gets hit as the unit presses forward, that happens, but those are good moments for that, because you're making your trade for overall tactical advantage for your team. When I talk about working together as a team, as a group, we need to, number one, act together. We need to, number two, be aggressive. And I don't mean running forward and killing the enemy team. I mean aggressively committing to our actions. So we don't want to hesitate. We want to take any action, any command that we're trying to achieve, and immediately and as quickly and safely as possible, try to execute it. Commander says press, it can't just be one or two people in the line press forward. It has to be the line presses together as a unit. You're more likely to survive in that scenario when everyone presses together, and you're more likely to take out the enemy team. You don't want to try to be the star. The star of the show is useful. We need hot sticks on the battlefield. We need people like the John Drakes of the world who can run up and 8 people can blink and be dead because he offed them with a dagger as he zipped the line. We do need those people. But when we're working as a unit, that person is just a component of our unit. They're not the star, because it took all of the people in front of that line working together to give that person the opportunity to make that. John Drake can't run up and stick 8 people with a dagger as he zips the line if there's not a line of people in front of them taking their attention, parrying blades, keeping them focused on a fight while someone else comes and exploits an advantage. Last, individuals die, groups survive. When you go out onto a melee field, especially if we're in a res battle, we don't want to come off of a res point alone and trickle into a location. We don't want to kill an enemy unit in front of us and then just have mass chaos milling about trying to figure out what we're going to do. We need to look for our allies, whether that's our unit, if there's any of them left, or whether that's our army or a nearby army, and immediately form up with those people so that we can now gain numerical superiority and take on another group. So how do we attack another group? There are a lot of different ways we can do it. The main thing we're going to be focusing on right now is shaping a line so that we know visually how we're going to take advantage of it. Then we're going to talk about a little bit later different tactics about how we utilize our stronger units, our mobile fighters, our static fighters, to make it all work together. So when we shape a line, we are looking to create an angle or a shape where we have numerical superiority and our enemy does not. So I'm going to pull up a cool little diagram I made. Okay, can everybody see this? I can't see your faces because I'm screen sharing, but I assume so. So right here, this is what it means to be shaping the line. If we see line 1, they have created this nice curve. They've pressed into line 2, and they have successfully been able to create an advantageous position. These three
sorry, line 2 is the blue line?
Is the blue line, yes.
Thank you.
So these 3 people right here could hit any one of these 3 people of line 2. Unfortunately for line 2, only one of them can hit all 3 people, and he is the most in danger of everybody. This is a great opportunity for line 1 to call a press. This guy's probably going to be the first to go. This guy's probably going to end up backing up this way, and then the rest of this line is going to fall apart rather quickly if these 3 people can win this 3v2. Probably they can, or more likely, these 2 people get pushed off. That happens, and then this person becomes John Drake and deals with everyone there, as long as his line is pressing and creating enough pressure for him to act. This is core to everything we're going to talk about when we talk about shaping a line. We have an example right here. A kill has occurred in the middle. Line 1 killed a person, and this guy in the middle moves forward. As he moves forward, he's starting to create a shape, and his team has followed him. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about why this particular shape they're creating isn't the best one. But what they've done is, on 2 sides of this line, they created numerical superiority. They create what we talk about a lot in Rapier as a kill pocket. And very swiftly, this is going to dissolve into line 2, hopefully dying. Otherwise, it's going to turn into mass chaos. Some of the stuff we'll talk about later is how do we prevent it from becoming mass chaos. So, as we go through, pull my notes, go through talking about this, we also need to think about how do we prevent our own line from getting shaped, right? Because it's never worse than when you're fighting on the melee field and all of a sudden there's a ring of people around you and you're just kind of looking like, well, I have no allies and lots of enemies. I guess it's a target-rich environment. But you don't want to be in a target-rich environment, now do you? So we're going to talk about how we'll break off small units or individuals to deal with flankers to prevent those shapes. We'll talk about spacing out our lines a little bit better so that when someone gets killed and drops out of that line, we're ready to fill those gaps. We need to talk about how we're going to assess the strengths of our unit. And this is going to be a little bit more for commanders, but it's still a really important skill. So who is good at what activity on the battlefield? Who's great at being fast and skirmishing? Who's great at standing static and controlling an area? Who's great at just causing chaos and sniping people or getting behind the enemy line and throwing bad commands at them? What are the people in my unit good at doing? And how can I, as a commander or as a participant in the melee, use that to my advantage? The last 2 actions we're going to talk about are very closely related. They're going to be pressing an advantage and regrouping our unit. So when we press an advantage, how do we do that? What are we doing? Am I calling a press? Am I moving my unit into a more advantageous position? When I have that advantage, how do I want to exploit it? Sometimes, this happened at Go For last year, the best option is in fact to pull our own unit back and attrit the enemy line because I see a unit flanking them and I need them in a better position for that flanking maneuver. So how do we as a unit execute that? How do we as commanders tell our unit to do that and train them to do it effectively? Then after that, we need to talk about how do we regroup. Once we've pressed our advantage, once we've completed the action, whether we won or lost that engagement, we need to talk about how do we regroup. What am I as a melee fighter on the line looking for after the engagement's completed if I've survived and I got to get back with my unit? And what do I as a commander do to get them all back with me? We'll talk about controlling tempo and taking advantage of the timing of our opponent's actions. We'll talk about, I'm going to go into right now the various commands, just so as I talk about all of this, we're all using the same language. So we'll be using dress the line tonight to describe how we get our line to reform in front of us, creating a line as opposed to a big curvy blob. We're going to talk about standing the line, telling them I want you here, I want you to stay here, and I don't want you to go forward or backward. We'll talk about being at the ready, what that means. I'm not in engagement yet. I'm prepared to fight if I need to, and I'm listening to my commander's orders. Advance. We all know advance. Go forward. If you encounter other guys, kill the other guys. Quick time. That's going to be advancing but fast, or retreating but quickly. How do I get from point A to point B faster than I did before? We're not going to use that as much outside of initially going into an engagement, but we've used it a couple of times with the Southern Region unit to great effect last year. Press. You're going to hear me talk about pressing a lot tonight. This is when we, as a unit, are going to aggressively go forward, attacking a position, and hopefully pressing through them so that we can move to another objective. Pulse. It's effectively press, but we stay stationary. We don't want to go forward. We all throw a shot. We all throw it together. Hopefully we all survive and we take a few of them. Sliding, lateral motions, left and right. Advancing by step. We'll talk about when we should use it, when we shouldn't use it. Also, we should always be attacking as we advance. I always use my advance by step as a lunge, and that's what I train my unit to do. We'll lunge and recover forward every time so that we're moving forward, we're gaining ground. We don't want to call a press in every situation because we don't necessarily need the mass chaos of everyone just attacking. A retreat and a retreat by step. How do we do it? Why do we do it? When do we do it? If you need explanation there, retreating is going backwards. Onsteorans don't tend to do it a lot. Wheeling and refusing. You're not going to hear these as much on the Rapier field, at least not yet. We're trying to incorporate them into our language. A wheel would be if we took a line and we moved one of the flanks of that line forward very quickly, very aggressively, and rotated it to try to get a better angle. Refusing would be the same thing, but with a retreat, we're going backward. So when we get into all of these things, we need to talk about how big is my unit. So if I'm in command of a small unit, let's say I've got 8 fighters, or I'm in a small unit of 8 fighters, what are the things my unit can do? So we need to be able to take up space. So if I'm in a group of 8 fighters and I need to go up against a group of, say, 16 fighters, I'm going to ask everyone in my unit to do wide spacing. Now, this is a thing that I prefer to train into a unit as opposed to trying to make a command for on the battlefield. People just need to do it organically, because if they don't do it organically, it tends to fall apart rapidly. And let me pull up my diagram here. There we go. So I have this picture here, sharing screen. So if you'll look at Unit 1, I've got them in a wide spacing scenario, and a small group of them are in the back, and we're going to talk about reserve units later. They're the reserve unit for this group. So as you can see, each of them is actually dealing with 2 people right now. Now, this is not an ideal scenario. I would hope to never be in everyone's in a 2v1. But it does happen at times. It happens on the field. It'll happen in the ravine. And we have to know how to deal with it. So if this happened and everyone was in a nice, neat little line together originally, and we got done with an engagement and a bunch of people died and we lost the engagement. And let's say these are the 4 people that died. So what I tend to see happen on the battlefield is this person's going to cluster over here. This person's all alone. He's going to die really, really, really fast. And then these 3 people are going to get surrounded, and then the fight's over. What could happen is that this person just moves a little bit further over, and that person actually moves to match. And now we can retreat together as a line, as a unit, either waiting for reinforcements or trying to reconnect with the rest of our army if it's still there. This will happen to you at war, and it is not to your advantage to go down swinging and charge into the enemy line, as I see so many people do as their unit is dissolving. Almost everything we do, especially in battles like the field battle, where we have limited resources in the form of no res, we need to talk about, how do I attrit the enemy more than my own unit? And attrition is simply the act of buying up time and removing their resources while losing as few of your own as possible. So in this case, this unit would want to be retreating, trying to get back to their line, their army, wherever that may be. And as Unit 2 advances forward, trying to find positions to flank them, they just need to move back together as a group. And every time someone takes an opportunity and gets too close, trying to make a shot, they need to be picked off by one of these people, because every single time they buy a few more seconds, they take out another person, they're gaining a little bit more advantage for their side. And just diving into this and getting yourself killed, or grouping up in 2 and 2 so that they can wrap us here, it's not to our advantage. And we need to remember that. So when we talk with our units at home, we need to go to our local practices and train reforming our units. And that's going to get into what we'll talk at the end about, which is drills. Most people do not enjoy doing drills. I understand that. If we don't drill these actions, if we don't practice them, we're not going to get good at them as units or as an army. So we need to start talking about that and working together before Gulf War, before Penzik, before wherever we're going to be fighting these melees, to make sure that everyone's on the same page and at least working on these things some amount. And I know many of your local groups do work on these activities, or other ones. And I think that we just need to do more of it. So what if I have a large unit? Say I have 16 people and I'm against the line of 4 people. Well, it's not to my advantage to wait around for those 4 people to have time to figure out what just happened after I eliminated their whole unit. I still need to stay together as a group, but I now need to isolate those people from one another. I can't let them gain cohesion. I can't let them lock back into a line of 4 people instead of 8 or 12 or whatever they started with, so that they feel like a unit again. Because if they feel like they're isolated on that battlefield, they're going to fall a lot more quickly. So I need to press my line forward aggressively. I need to press only enough of that line forward to effectively deal with those 4 people without having any losses. The rest of my group, say I have 16 and there's 4, I'm going to take 12 of them, and I'm going to throw that 12 at the 4 people, because there is very little scenario where those 4 people, each of them in a 3-on-1, is going to come out of that, and a low probability that they're going to kill anyone in the process. My other 4 people are now free to go do what I want. And so often on the battlefield, we're like, I'm part of a unit, and my unit is killing those 4 people, so I'm going to go with those 4. That's not always the best choice. This is why I'm trying to talk to people about breaking off into groups of 2 to 4 people as battle buddies, right? Small groups that work together. Because I can now, as a commander, go say, hey, you 4, I need you over on the left flank. We're getting hit really hard over there. And they break off from the unit and go deal with a problem, while the rest of my unit mops up that area. Once everything's been dealt with, I can then take the rest of the unit and move it to meet that smaller group. The reason I want to take my large group, if I have 16 and have 4 groups of 4, is because a small unit, a group of 4 to 5 people, is pretty mobile. They can move around, they can listen to individual commands, I can separate them out if I need to, and they're perfectly capable of just hearing press and going with everybody. However, a large unit is a nightmare to try to get to do everyone to do everything you want them to. Melees are loud. We basically have cotton stuffed in our ears in the form of our hoods and our masks. You can't hear everything. If I, as a commander, try to command all 16 people at once, even with parroting, a lot of people are going to miss my commands. But if I can say, hey, you unit of 4, go do this action, and have pre-planned actions for the large group outside of breaking off individual groups, I'll be much more successful. The same applies in small unit tactics. When I have a 7-on-7 or a 5-on-5, it's very easy from a command perspective to tell everyone, here's your initial action, and then call, hey, Peter, I need you to break off and go deal with Davius. As a small unit, we want to look big. We want to stay mobile, and we want to maintain threat. As a large unit, we want to be able to take up space on the field, shape the battle in the way we want it, with the shaping we were talking about, creating angles and kill pockets. And so we need to know when are those times to do that. As a small unit, we want to break off from a main body at a given opportunity. So we finished a fight. I want to take my small unit, break off, and now I'm going to go deal with the enemy army by creating a flank. My large unit, if I'm in command of, say, all of Ansteora or all of Southern Region or whatever, I'm now going to take my whole large unit and I'm going to move them to meet up with the rest of the army, as opposed to trying to create smaller, more advantageous positions. Does that make sense? Do we have any questions, comments? I'll take that as a no. So when we get on the battlefield at Gulf War, the other thing that we have to talk about that's part of our units is shields. And shields are super polarizing. We have some people who really love having shield walls in rapier combat. And we have other people who hate having shield walls in rapier combat. And there the two shall mix. Because the ones who, and they both have good points. The ones who love shield walls see them as a defensive point that can protect a location and act as a good core or anvil for your army if we're doing hammer and anvil setups. The ones who hate shields are the ones who say, I have this tiny little dagger and I can get up in the shieldman's face and just stab him with the dagger, and what's he supposed to do about it? And both of those things are true. So shield units are going to be immobile. They tend not to be able to move and rotate very quickly. They don't have the firepower of a unit that has a lot of people with case or dagger. And so we need to know what to do with them and how to train them. So the first thing is we need to make sure that wherever we're placing our shields, we know where that location is, and we're going to utilize that spot, because it's probably the most immobile point on the battlefield. The enemy is going to hit that spot, and they're not going to go forward very far. And when they hit the enemy line, even if they get kills, they're probably not going to go forward very far. And that's for a couple of reasons. First, we don't have as much firepower in a shield unit, but we have a lot more defense. Secondarily, especially in Ansteora, we tend to put weaker fighters in our shield units. So those units tend to be less likely to be the ones that are going to make really aggressive actions when they gain an advantage. They tend to be more conservative. They tend to fight further back from the opponents, so they're less likely to get hit. But we can utilize this to our advantage, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because we know those areas where we have those shield units are going to die less quickly, they're going to retreat less quickly, we also know that we can use our small mobile fighter units to take advantage of them. And so when we're doing this, we want to place our shields on flanks where we don't want to get wrapped easily, where we don't want to get pressed back easily. And we like to use our shields, I like to use my shields also in the core of my unit. So say I have 10 fighters. My ideal scenario is that I have 3 people with shields in the center and a shield on either flank. And then my other 5 fighters are interspersed throughout that with whatever styles they're fighting. And I can now move my more aggressive fighters out, and as they take kills on flanks, I can pop them off and move them to new locations. And I treat those more aggressive fighters, my hot sticks, my dagger fighters, almost as light infantry, as skirmishing units. The shields, meanwhile, will stay together as a unit in a single line moving forward. As soon as we take an objective, I'll condense them all back together. We'll reform our line, and then we'll move on to our next objective. I'll use the shields to anchor my unit again, and then I'll take my aggressive fighters, intersperse them throughout that formation, and slowly but steadily press forward through the enemy unit. This is why I really like retreats, is because shield lines are really, really good at attriting the enemy when they're retreating. If I take a shield unit and I teach every single one of them to throw a shot as they're retreating, to make a reverse lunge each time, keeping the shield in front of them, firing a shot, taking a step back, especially if I do that in the middle of an enemy press, I'm going to attrit them much more quickly than they're going to attrit me. And the fact that they're going to have so many casualties can break presses. It can reduce their numbers to an extent where I can make a counter press. And in some cases, as happened last year, we'll enter an incident where they've attrited so much and pushed so far forward that now they're being flanked by my line that they thought that they were just going to be able to push through. They tried to create a kill pocket. They tried to shape us. They tried to create a curve. They failed to do so. And now my line was able to just come and chew them, another unit. Shields are great at protecting objectives. If I have a limited front engagement, say I'm protecting a door in a building, put 3 shields in the door, make sure that they all stand very far behind that shield, and it's incredibly difficult to break them out of that building. Especially if I've got other fighters behind them with blades over the shields, you will lose many, many people and take a very long time to press through that formation if your shield fighters keep the shield ahead of them, as opposed to standing tight up to the shield with the sword out and trying to be, cowering from it. Keep the shield out, put the sword out with the shield, create space for yourself with the shield. Train your unit to do that, because when you can do that and do it well, it is very difficult to take a limited front objective from you. They're excellent at protecting points. When we're in the ravine battle, put a unit of shields in front of a flag and 2 lighter units to either side to be able to work on their flanks. And it's very difficult to take that shield unit out. They'll retreat more slowly. They'll be able to protect the flag better. And then we can use the advantage of those slower moving, more defensive units. We need to make sure that we space them out properly. Because they're a little more defensive, I find that they don't need to be as tightly grouped. Because when I train people to use a shield for melee purposes, I'm training them to create space to get the shield in front of them. One of the things they can do is they can space out and they can take 1.5 fighters per shieldman. And that way, I can then remove the fighters that would be part of that equation, helping them defend that point, and use them to counter the enemy's movements trying to take out that shield wall. I need to be aware of their weaknesses. I need to be aware that they're very vulnerable to being flanked. Shield units, especially if I can't have a lefty protecting one side and a righty protecting the other, are incredibly vulnerable to being taken out by flankers, especially one with a dagger, because they can get in close. They can stab the person at a range where they can't deal with them, and then they're just going to go down the line. So I need other units that are more aggressive and able to move faster on the flanks of those shield units to protect them. I need to be aware of the fact that those shield units aren't going to be moving forward as quickly. They tend to be composed of fighters that are not as aggressive or not as athletic. And in that case, I need to be aware of how fast they can go. They're going to set the pace of my army. And if that means that the pace of my army is slow, then I have to work around that. If the pace of my unit is advance at the mosey, then I need to know what I'm going to do with my reserve fighters. What am I going to do with my aggressive fighters who want to run and sprint up to the front, even if it's only a couple of them, in the time it's going to take all of those shieldmen to get there. Because if that shield line arrives too late, then all of my aggressive fighters just ran into an enemy line by themselves and died. And I've watched it happen a lot. So the key component to the strategy I'm talking about here is reserve units. So if I have shield lines and I want to use them as effectively as possible, I need to have a reserve behind them ready to take advantages of openings. And so I'm going to show a diagram here that should explain that pretty well. I will absolutely get to that, Peter. So, here we go. All right, so this is the first diagram I'm going to show. In this case, I've got two fairly small units, and I'm not, for the time being, assuming that there is an invisible line that extends out to either side. Shared. So Unit 1 is broken into a reserve, the 3 green fighters in the back, and a shield line or a screen, which is the yellow fighters up here. Unit 2 is attacking them as a single line. For the purposes of this, I am assuming that I have intentionally engaged in this manner with Unit 1. I've intentionally held back this unit as a reserve and allowed my shield wall here to advance with these pockets, and we'll see why in a moment. So what I want my reserve units to do is, and the reason I want them to be as mobile and as fast as I'm talking about, is I want fighters who are skilled enough and have enough energy that they can drop in and out of the screen as they need to, when and where they need to take advantage of situations. So the first thing that's going to happen is these 3 fighters in green are going to drop into various locations in the screen. They're going to try to take advantage of weaknesses they see in the enemy line. Now, let's assume that on the right flank over here, the fighting gets pretty hot, and this green fighter is not capable of leading. These 2 fighters, however, they don't have any targets in front of them. Everyone in front of them is playing pretty passively, and there's no opportunity for a kill. So I would say, as a commander, that I would take these 2 guys, tap them on the shoulder, and say, I want you to flank that line. So they're going to pop out. They'll rotate to the other side and create a flank and try to shape the line. If the enemy line responds as it should, it's going to try to fall back or spread out to deal with the 2 of them. Meanwhile, this guy over here is trying to deal with the fact that the enemy line is very quickly and very aggressively going to deal with him. So he's going to pop out as they break off to flank his line. When they move in, he's now going to move to this new location and protect the flank so that he can try to form a counterflank and then attempt to shape the line forward. Now, this is an ideal scenario, and assuming all of those things that we're trying to do worked. If you'll notice, the reason I have this fighter break off to help with the flank as opposed to spreading this unit out. So traditionally, we train to spread the unit out to deal with a flanker, and that's generally the right answer. However, I tend to find that as these 2 people break off to form a flank, especially if everyone in yellow here is a very defensive fighter or part of a shield wall, and they do not have to be shield wall fighters. They could just be very static fighters who I know I can trust to stay alive through this. This unit or individual is going to be able to move much faster and respond better, especially if they're the person that I'm relying on to make these quick aggressive actions, by breaking off and coming around to deal with the threat, because this pressure is going to relax as these 2 people leave. These 2 people are probably hot sticks. This is my Trapon and Davius's. This is my Peters and Mateos and John Drakes and Master Miles's. So as they break off to form that flank, I need to take my equally aggressive fighter and respond to them, and hopefully be able to shape that line back or kill one of them. If they can't, what tends to happen, and we see this a lot in the field battle, is that this line is actually going to end up doing this. And now we have what is the beginnings of the tidy bowl of death. It's not convenient for anybody. It's kind of messy, and we need to prevent that. And that's why I want to break off my aggressive fighters or my aggressive units out from the main wall and deal with threats on my flank with those faster, more aggressive units. I think they're better for dealing with high aggression, and I think that those tend to be the people that want to deal with high aggression scenarios. Another example, let's go to this one. Nope. So I have two lines that are engaged. As the engagement continues, one fighter gets killed, and this guy right here is trying to create shape. He's aggressively pushing forward. The line forms. We've got a kill pocket on either side. They kill everybody. What happens, however, if two fighters come in up here? This is the same reason I like having quick actions and working together with cohesion with my reserve units. So for the purpose of this, we're going to assume that this guy's part of the reserve, this guy's part of the shield wall, this is a reserve unit, and this is a reserve unit. So my reserve, my aggressive force, did what their job was. They punched a hole in the enemy line, they created shape. I would rather see them do this. They take the pick, they move forward, they create shape, they stay together with the line. Even if something goes wrong, even if an enemy force comes in here as they did there, they're going to stay together with their line, with their unit, until another command is given to break them off, because now they are part of this unit, and reform this group. As they reform, these two guys are going to fall into position, but at this point, we still have numerical advantage. They're going to press again, and as they press again, they should be able to kill the enemy and create shapes on the battlefield. After that, the unit should regroup back to that formation and move on to its next objective. This only works, however, if I have these reserve units that can slip into spaces on the battlefield and make those plays for me. If I don't space them out far enough, then they aren't going to see those opportunities. If I put them too far from the line, they can't get there in time to deal with the opportunities. And so as a commander, I need to make sure that my reserve unit is in a position to take advantage of those places. They should be in front of me. I should be as far behind the line as possible to command them, not so close that I'm right up in the battle. My reserve should be right in front of me, ready to send wherever I need them to go. And this gets into my next point. When I have a reserve unit like that, they can fill one of a few different roles. I can have a fire and forget unit. This is the most common one you'll see in the SCA. I have a unit, they sit behind my line, the line goes forward and engages, and then I tell them before the battle ever starts, here's where you're going to go, you're going to be the hammer, you're going to punch through this spot and make an opening for me. The next type of unit you can have is a commander-controlled unit. So either I, as the commander, am giving each of them individual instructions, or I have a sub-commander that works with that unit, and I tell them, okay, go, I'm going to send y'all over there, and they will break their unit off as they see fit. This is a little slower. It has the advantage of I, as the commander, have more control over how I want the battle to develop. Disadvantage is that unit can't act as quickly. The third, and my preference, they're more independent units. The general is going to give them a general game plan. They're going to say, I want you under a certain specific area in the line, and I want you to look for a weakness. And at that point, the reserve unit's on their own. The commander of the reserve unit, and in this case they need one, is then going to assess the line in front of them, see the parts where it's weak, and aggressively exploit those situations. But this only works if I train a handful of my units to act as a screen for these reserves, leave wide enough openings for the reserve to enter, and know what sections of the battlefield I'm attempting this on. That way they can pop in and out of the line and make use of those opportunities as they see fit. We need to train our reserve units, if we want to do tactics like this, to be willing to drop out of the line when they don't see an opportunity to get a kill. If they stay around too long or they get stuck in a static fight, they are neither gaining an advantage there on the battlefield, nor are they contributing to the overall game plan. And finally, I need to train the rest of my army not to bunch up. When things go wrong or well, what tends to happen is people tend to collect together and they get tight. When that happens, there's not enough room for my reserve units to enter the line and work with them. And there's not enough space for my own fighters to fight. So when we go to our weekly practices and we're working with our groups to try to train them for melees, it's important that we talk to them about keeping their spacing. And this is where dressing the line comes into play, because we'll give them a command to dress to restore that spacing so that if they have reserve fighters, the reserve fighters can enter the line, or they're not bunched up and tight when they get into bad situations and they're able to reform their line and reassess a situation and try to take back the field and shape it themselves. So we've talked about screens, we've talked about why I like using them, why I think we need to use more of them, and how we can use them. We need to talk about what happens when things go wrong. Say I'm outnumbered on the other side. My reserve has already joined my unit, and my unit is getting pressured. I need to be able to retreat, and I need to be able to do it effectively. If all I do is run my unit backward, I will achieve nothing. I will kill no one. I will create a space for the enemy to flank my own line, and disaster will ensue. If I train my unit through the drills we'll talk about here in a few minutes, and they're all listed at the end of the class notes document, to aggressively attrit that line in front of them, I can do two things. I can, one, attrit the enemy line, perhaps relieve pressure, and free up my reserve unit either to leave that location and create flanks and shaping on the battlefield, or two, I can give the rest of my army time to respond to that pressure, flank that line that's attacking me, deal with it, and now I can move all of my forces from that location into another place on the battlefield to help the army as a whole. And the last thing tactically we need to talk about is assessing new objectives. And a lot of commanders are really bad at this. We tend to get into this scenario where we go forward, we achieve our objective, we kill everyone in front of us, and now our whole unit is milling about and doesn't know what to do. And I'm sure everyone has gotten into this situation. It's near the end of a battle. There is mass chaos going on. You're chasing down the last handful of fighters. You know, they're all trying to reform up into small groups. What do we do? If I kill the group in front of me, the first thing I'm going to tell my unit to do is to reform on me. I'm going to point to a location. I'm going to give the command to reform. They should reform in front of me at that location. And now I can give commands to my unit to move forward into a new position where I can hopefully exploit the battlefield better. If we do this as individuals, if we just let the unit go and disperse at will, we're going to be less effective than if we can regroup our units quickly and efficiently and move them about the battlefield. This is especially important for the reserve units I'm talking about in those screen tactics. Whoever their commander is has to be very good at, once they've achieved an objective and they know the line is going to finish the objective off, pulling their reserve out of that situation and moving them to a new place on the battlefield. Because at that point, they are no longer serving their purpose of creating advantage. And that is everything I want to look to do in a melee. I think that's everything we should be looking to do, is creating advantageous positions for our forces. So how do we practice these things? This should only take a couple minutes here. First, we need to form unit cohesion. We need to form trust between everyone in our units about how we're going to go about all of this, how we're going to work together. And so I like to spend the first 5 to 10 minutes of each melee practice I do drilling with my unit, just doing commands. I know it's boring. I know most people don't like to do it. It's super important. For the commanders, it gives them the opportunity to practice giving commands, which a lot of people don't have opportunities to do. For the rest of the line, it gets them used to working together, to reacting together, to doing everything as a group. I try to make sure that we determine our battle buddies ahead of time after that. Who are the 3 people that I want working with each other? Who do I see that they inherently work well together, whether that's personalities or fighting styles? I try to make sure as a commander that they practice next to each other. I'll split them up occasionally throughout the practice, just so that they get the opportunity to work with other people and work in chaotic situations. It happens on a battlefield, your whole unit's dead, and you end up with Palantir. You never know. You need to be ready for those situations. But if you are prepared to work with a group as your battle buddies, you're used to defending each other, you're used to keeping each other alive, you're more likely to work together effectively. And then I like to create small units within my larger ones. With Southern Region, we had the Fire Drakes, and then I created a regional unit that acted as the screen for the Fire Drakes to be able to move around and fight around last year. It worked very well. I think it would work well again and work for other units. If you've got more than 10 people, create 2 units out of it. Have 2 sub-commanders. Those sub-commanders are going to fight on the line with that unit, but their job overall is to be listening to you, be parroting your commands, and being loud. Train your units to parrot your commands. Train them to be as loud as possible on the battlefield. Whenever they hear a command, they should be saying that command. If you say advance by step, everybody repeats with advance by step. I already talked about how the battlefield is loud, and if you don't do this, you simply can't hear what's going on. When we practice all of these activities, we need to know the difference between drilling and fighting. Drilling is focused practice. It's working on a specific objective. It tends to be good for improving unit skill and cohesion. It trains the unit to act and react without needing to think. And it tends to increase confidence in a single skill. For it to work, fighters can't game the drill. Otherwise, the drill loses all purpose. If I say, okay, you can only win by killing people that are not directly in front of you. You have to kill people on your angles. And the fighter in front of you goes, oh, well, I'm just going to jump right and left to tank the sword for someone on those angles. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose. If we're practicing retreating and you say, okay, you have to kill the enemy unit as you retreat and get back to this point. And instead of bothering with killing the enemy unit, they just sprint back to that point. Well, it defeated the purpose of the drill. We need to design our drills to be narrow and focused, so they're difficult to game. But as fighters, we need to remember that we're playing within the rules of that vacuum so that we can better drill and better focus on these objectives. The goal of drilling is to improve our skills. Fighting is lining people up, allowing them to fight. It doesn't matter if it's a res battle. It doesn't matter if it's objective control, last man standing. It tends to increase morale, I find, at practices. People like just going out there, having no real rules other than I'm on one side and you're on the other, and stabbing each other. It tends to be a little more fun, more relaxing. People are a little looser. Gaming the rules is fine. The goal is to win. If they find some way to cheese your rules to win, then they have achieved the goal. Whether that is They find some guy who's really good at telling time or has a stopwatch, and he stands in the back and counts down whenever it's time to go get a flag. Fighting is great for training endurance. You can go from one engagement to the next very quickly. It's good for, okay, we're going to fight for 5 minutes in a res battle. Everyone take water for 30 seconds, back up, another 5-minute res battle. That way we can train our fighters to have the stamina for res battles in things like the ravine or the woods battle. And it's great for training flexibility. Fighting like that tends to be a little more chaotic. We tend to get separated from our battle buddies. It's a great opportunity to separate people from their battle buddies. And that way, they're getting to practice in new and interesting scenarios. Mix your teams up when you do it. The goal of fighting is to win and to have fun. So I have a few drills here. If you have a small group of people, you can do what I like to call rabbit drills. You take 3 people, they go up against a single person. The goal of the one person, the rabbit, is to run around as quickly as possible to stay mobile, to attack flanks. The 3 people are the hounds. Their goal is to lock down the rabbit and kill them as quickly as possible. The rabbit wants to stay alive and try to kill the enemy team if they can. The hounds want to kill the rabbit, and as quickly as they can. The hounds should be trying to spread out and gain angles on the rabbit, pressure them, don't allow them to move around too much. If the rabbit gets away from the hounds and starts to run, that's generally when the hounds are going to lose. You can make this drill harder as you practice it more by saying all of the hounds or some amount of the hounds are not allowed to die or take injuries. You can practice flanking. You create a small line of people, you take another small line, you limit their engagement. So you take a sidewalk or the edge of your battlefield, you use that as this invisible point where the line goes on forever from there. And now one side has to create a flank. You tell which side is going to create the flank to do so, and the other side has to respond to it. The idea is that once line one creates their flank, that flanker should call a press, and hopefully they should kill the other line quickly. It doesn't always happen. Maybe they don't all press together. Maybe the flanker is not in a great position. I like having my experienced fighters there to practice this, but I tend not to use them as the flanker because they already know how to do it. That's a great role for less experienced fighters so they can practice those high aggressive activities. I like to do cross attack drills. So I tell my group, okay, you're not allowed to kill the person in front of you. The only people you can get kills on are people on angles. This trains my fighters to practice looking using their peripheral vision for openings. It also trains my fighters to protect their allies and not themselves. There are 2 ways this can be done. Either you penalize them for losing fighters to their right and left, or you're trying to get them to kill the fighters on their angles. Either way, it's a great drill. You have both sides do it. People become much more aware of shots coming in for their buddy, because now the risk of losing is not if they die or if they get the kill, it's if the people to their right and left die. Drills for larger groups. Retreating drills. I set a line, usually using traffic cones or terrain, and I'll have a secondary location where the group has to line, or the line has to retreat to. Then I set rules. So the line doing the retreating, generally they have to either lose none of their fighters or some number, depending on how large it is and what I think is reasonable for the engagement, while killing some number of the enemy force, and reach that line in their retreat. So this forces them to stay in engagement, because if they break engagement, they can't follow the rule of I have to kill fighters and stay alive and retreat at the same time. If you have enough people that you as the commander can stand outside, watch those 2 lines, and if they break engagement, reset the drill. Because people, as they retreat, inherently want to break engagement. They inherently want to back up too far, And the goal is to keep them just inside engagement range, always throwing shots as they're stepping backward, trying to maintain that threat. We practice that pretty frequently here in Bringwad when we were having consistent melee practices. And we were getting very good at that drill, and we've used it several times to great effect in fights. Switching sides when you do that is literally just swap the lines. Whoever retreats most effectively, kills the most people, wins. Restricted access drills. Create a restricted access point. We have the great luck of having a tennis court, so we can use the rectangles on the court as rooms. We put up traffic cones for doors, and you fight through the door. The side inside the building they have no res, and their only job is to hold the building as long as possible. The side outside the building has unlimited res and a res point reasonably far away. We usually do about 30 feet. And their goal is to take the building as quickly as possible. You time them, they go through, you see how it goes. We do a lot of limited access battles at war. I think it's a good drill. It practices what you need to be doing. That's also a great opportunity for your shields to practice giving themselves proper spacing when they're plugging up those gaps, when they're plugging up those limited access points. If they space themselves out well, if they keep the shield far in front of themselves, they will live longer, they will hold that point longer. We also have active methods of training that we use. These are less restricted, less organized than drilling. I'll get all my fighters on the field, divide them into two sides, and I'll give them very simple objectives in a last man standing battle. Your goal here is to focus on keeping your buddy alive. No one's allowed to do flanking. We're pretending we're in one giant line. Control this point, but you have to do it in X manner. Give very limited guidance on what you want them to do, but an objective to think about. You as the commander should stand outside of this, not participate. Watch them. Observe what they're doing. In between each engagement, give feedback. Get everyone together, talk about what went wrong, what went right. Did they achieve their goal that they were trying to achieve? Were they thinking about the action you wanted them to think about? Reset, allow them to try again. I like to do this 2 or 3 times. It takes 5 minutes or less per fight. They go, they fight, we talk for 30 seconds to a minute, take water for a second, go right back into it. That'll usually take up about 45 minutes of a practice of just running through that. It's great to have other people outside with you as the commander so you can get different perspectives. I love having Master Avery able to sit over my shoulder and be like, well, I saw this thing. I'm like, yeah, that was good. I didn't catch that one. So you want to do that quickly, though. As soon as they get done with whatever that activity is, you want to move them right back into fighting again. They've talked about it. They've had the conversation. Bam, next fight. 3 times, go take water. Reset. Here's a new thing to think about. All 3 of those activities, drilling, active training, fighting, they're really useful at your practices. And I think we should be doing all of them. I like to start with drilling at the beginning for about an hour. I'll move into active training stuff for the remainder of practice, and then I'll end just allowing them to fight. I tend to like res battles for that because that's what my unit wants to do a lot of. They're all young and want to run, and res battles are great for that. So I've talked a lot, but I wanted to get feedback and questions. So y'all can all unmute yourselves if you like. If anyone has any questions about anything I've talked about or anything you think I've missed, I'd appreciate it. I'm going to look at the Zoom chat here to see if anyone posted anything for me. Yes, Pete did. So I absolutely think the Rapier spears are going to change this equation as we bring them into melees. I think if we...
what's his question? I can't see it.
How do you think the use of now legal rapier spears will change melee? What if they add the spears into those shield units? I really want to add those spears into shield units. I think that is a great idea. I think we will have much more interesting tactics on the battlefield if we do that. I recognize the concerns with doing that. And I know that it's a thing that we need to kind of move a little slowly with and be careful about because there's still people that are apprehensive about it. But every melee I've done that involves spears, I've really enjoyed. I think it creates some interesting dynamics on the battlefield. If I were to change that screen strategy up to include spears, I would actually probably put my spears ahead of the shield unit. I love ancient Roman tactics, and they were big fans of having light infantry with long poles and or bows out in front of their line to initially harass the enemy force. They'd then break them off and move them behind a shield wall. The shield wall would form up, and then those light fighters would act as skirmishers, either on the sides or behind the shield wall. I think spears are ideal for that. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I joined like partway through.
That's okay.
Is this heavy fighting or?
This is light fighting that we're talking about, but feel free to ask your question.
No, that was mostly.
Oh.
Is this like rapier or pole arms? I'm not entirely
We're
familiar
talking
with the term
about rapier right now. Spears were just made legal for rapier combat. Yeah, so that's exciting. And there is the possibility, I know people have been running part of the experiment doing melees with them. I've really enjoyed all the melees I've done with them.
Also, Miss Deborah, I love your cats.
Other questions? Or comments?
I have a question. How do you get buy-in for the various parts of a melee practice? You talked about kind of doing 3 main parts of a melee practice: the drills, the active or like guided fighting scenarios, and then free fighting, basically.
Yes. So we fortunately have a lot of people who really love melees down in Bringwalads, and we have a very large practice, so it's pretty easy for us to both get people at practice to have enough for a melee practice, and because a lot of them like to do melees, some of them exclusively, it's pretty easy to get them to want to do melee. However, people were hesitant to do strictly melee practices once a month. So the best way I found to get buy-in was to start by just letting them have fun, whatever your group considers fun at your melee practice. So if they just like fighting, say, you know what, 1 week a month at fighter practice, we're going to spend an hour and just do melees for that hour and then break off into free fighting. And if they get used to that, they enjoy it, you think your local group is interested in that, then that's when you can talk to people about ramping that up. Another option, and this is what I did when I was back in Shadowlands, is for our melee unit there, we picked a day of the week that was not a fighter practice day, and we held a 3-hour-long melee practice every week on that day. And we did that for several months because, again, we had buy-in of people who enjoyed melee practice. And, you know, we only had, I think, 7 or 8 people that came to that consistently, but it was pretty well attended. People seemed to enjoy it. First goal is get melee fighting going at your practice, even if it's just fighting. I know there have to be other questions and comments.
I have one, but it's not really very on topic aside from being society related.
Oh, okay.
Where is Shadowlands? I'm sorry.
Oh, Shadowlands is College Station, Texas.
Okay, because I'm not quite new to the society, but I was raised more or less in it. My dad was in it back in the 90s.
Okay. Texas A&M University, yeah.
Okay, I'm up near Oak Spring, so
Okay.
and also not even technically old enough to have my own membership, nor do I have money.
So what, and if no one has any questions, what are things that you have found successful, because discussion is important and I like hearing other people's ideas for getting buy-in for your own melee practices, or getting your own units to work on these things like this.
I'll chirp in for a minute. Hi, I'm Rapier. I'm here from the Mid-Realm.
Hi, Rapier.
One of the things that I know, like, I started a while ago. I remember, like, when I started Melee with my group, it was really hard because it was a really good Melee group, and, like, I had so much catch-up to do. So when I started teaching it, one of the things that I found helpful was I made everyone just bring single sword.
Okay.
Right, because if you're like a new intermediate fencer and that guy has case and that woman has like a rotella and you have to deal with all of these things and also melee for the first time, it's a lot, right? So if you reduce the number of things they have to think about, you just go, everyone gets one sword, it makes that initial like onboarding process a lot easier.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I
Reducing
do
variables
too.
helps.
I don't know. I think Namron and Beezenfoyer are just like melee enough that somebody mentions it and we get a group going. So, I mean, we turn it into a game of Smear the Peacock or whatever, but melees are big in our group. So I don't
What's
know.
Smear the Peacock?
Yeah.
It's basically field hockey, but you use a cloak as a puck and you try to get it from one end of the practice area to the other, depending
you
on
just like
which
whack it with
goal
a
you
stick.
have. And no, they will, they will scoot it along the floor with the tip of their swords. They'll pick it up and use it as a cloak. They'll do all kinds of things with it. It's hilarious to watch. So
My
I'm not
group
very
really likes a game kind of, it's not a field hockey-esque, it's very high energy. We call it ditching. So you line up both sides mostly even. Doesn't really matter if they're even.
Right.
They fight. Whichever side wins, the first person from their side to die now is on the other team. And so one side is the winning side progressively gets smaller until they stop winning and it goes the other direction.
Yeah.
I like that.
We've
Very small.
Yeah.
We've done that as Red Rover, right? So the losing side just picks someone.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Red Rover
I'll have
would
to
be
get.
fun, but it wouldn't work at our practice because they'd always pick the same person.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to get somebody to actually explain the rules of Smear the Peacock better than I can. You'd think the current Namron Marshal would be able to explain it, but I can't.
More melee games. I like the idea of that.
Yeah.
Combat soccer, but with a cape.
I mean,
Yeah.
the melee games are a great way to just like at the end of a practice, you've done all the drilling, you've had them all thinking about what I'm supposed to be working on tonight. Now they can just relax and do whatever they want,
Yeah.
ditching or Smear the Peacock or whatever else. And that's a good opportunity just to let all your fighters relax. I like to close out melee practices like that. I think it's a great way. And if other people have drills or melee games, please tell me.
Yeah, it's a lot of what I've found is like making sure you play those games in more optimal ways. So like does everyone here like know Fox and Hounds? Is that a thing?
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone doesn't, right, it's essentially you have like one person is the fox and you have two hounds, they have to go kill that person. Right? It's all melee boils down to like this basic principle of I broke off my line and I want to grab two of you. So now my line has 9 people fighting your line of 8 people, and my line wins, and they come back and help me eventually. One of the ways we'll do this, right, is you have the whoever like the hound is that kills the fox like becomes the next fox, and then whoever's standing in line jumps in. The bad way to do this is then you switch roles the instant you stab someone. Right. So if these two hounds right here and like this one kills this person, then these two people are instantly fighting each other without this person having coming out, and it sets it up really poorly.
Yeah.
But that was like a thing. Like people used to game it like that for a few years, and then we're like, no one does that ever again. It doesn't teach anything.
You were talking about it. It all comes down to, can I break a person off of this line, take two of them away? So one of the things I like working with my Southern Regional unit when I'm getting to work with them on is, so I'll make a quick diagram of it. It doesn't take long. So say I've got two engagements that have happened, right? This happens all the time on the melee. Someone gets in the back line, and part of your line breaks off to go deal with them, right? And so when this happens, one of the things I like to do is, say I know my line is winning the engagement, and the other side, the people that broke off to deal with whoever's in the back line, they're not, right? They're even numbers. They don't have numerical advantage. The thing that we generally do in that scenario is we try to get our line to kill the enemy force as quickly as possible, right? We want to leave all of our forces on that one big line to deal with them. I do it a little differently. So I'm sharing right now. So I've got, in the back here, I've got our people in the back line from the enemy team. I've got overwhelming advantage against the enemy side. They've already started to win and push through. And then I've got two units from the allied team that have broken off to deal with that back line, right? So what I would do in this scenario is, as the commander, I would tell, this guy to break off. This is one. This fight is over right here, right? Break off and create a flank here, because now this 3v2 is going to end much faster, and one of two things is going to happen. Either you kill this entire line, they win, no problem, game over, and you all gang up on these two people in the corner. Or this turns into a static fight. These two people are now out of the equation, and these three people can return to my line and help end that fight. If this is going to turn into a static fight, this one person, when I already have numerical advantage, doesn't make a difference. If I've already shaped the battlefield and I already have advantage, this one extra person is probably not going to win this fight. What they can do is end another fight quicker somewhere else on the battlefield and allow my whole unit to deal with a problem. Now, I recognize that there is this risk here that this either turns static or, we don't get the kill we want. But I find in my past experiences that it has been more successful that way.
But go ahead if you wanted to say anything.
Oh, continue.
A tool that we've also found helpful is using a timer, right? Like if you have, if you can, whatever the scale is, right? The numerical advantage side doesn't just have to win this fight, they have to win it faster so they can get to the rest of the battle. Right, so even in a 2-on-1 scenario, right, don't just play it out till the two people beat the one person.
Oh, yeah.
Give them, pick, 30 seconds. I mean, like, the amount of time is arbitrary, but like, give them a fixed amount of time to do it, because if it takes them 2 minutes to kill a guy, they lost. It's like they failed their mission.
So we've got another great question here from Peter. He says, I've heard drills for town and field battles, but what is a good game drill for ravine type battles? So one of the things I like to do when we're working on that is, so we'll set up our control point, whether that is a water jug or we're fortunate enough that Tyvar has brought out his actual raisable flag. And when I set them to practicing on that, I'll generally, I use that as the more active style training method. So I'll set them a goal or an objective. So for example, I'll say we can't flank each other because that's pretty accurate if you're on that middle flag at Gulf War, because there's nowhere really to try to make a flank happen, which creates really interesting things because now they have these two static facing lines and you have to kill someone and try to press through as quickly as possible. That becomes more a game of timing for the units than it does become a game of how do I get one hot stick fighter on a corner and just zip a line. Another thing I like to do with that is I'll actually call out 10 seconds before a point's going to be called. I'll say 10 seconds. And what I'm trying to train my units to do is to have a command from a commander that they need to take this objective, whether that's 10 seconds or whatever the command is. And then they get very aggressive for that 10-second period and try to gain that advantage. Oh, that's a cool idea too, Helena. All right, well, we are over our hour for the class. If ever anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask them, but I'm going to officially say that class is over at this point, and that I very much appreciated everyone coming and listening. If you have any feedback, if there was anything you thought I could have improved, please feel free to shoot me a message or whatnot, and I'd gladly like to hear it.
Thank you, Twill.
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
check out the schedule for next week or the next 2 weeks. We've got some fun stuff coming up.
Is there a pinned post in the group? I was having trouble finding it.
No,
There's
it's
an event.
I should pin it, but I keep forgetting to when I do it schedule update. I'll try to do that. Go back and pin the last schedule update.
Thanks.
All right, y'all have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.